witches, Tiffany here, and I'm back with another book review. Today we're going to talk about Of Blood and Bones by Kate Freuler. Freuler. I think it's Freuler. I'm gonna say Freuler. I'm sorry if I'm wrong. Of course, the complete title is Of Blood and Bones, Working with Shadow Magic and the Dark Moon. To be honest, this is probably one of the most refreshing witchcraft books I've read in a hot minute. Is it a beginner book? I wouldn't say it should be the first book someone reads, or even necessarily like their second or third. But if you're a beginner and you have the basics down, you probably shouldn't feel a need to hold off on this one. In her writing, Freuler does assume that the reader has a certain level of knowledge and experience. But like I said, so long as you have the basics down, a few introductory books under your belt, as well as a little bit of time and experience actually practicing your craft, you don't have to worry about being in over your head with this book. The book, of course, is linked down below in the description box. Of Blood and Bones is 312 pages, which I highly encourage you to follow in order. Now, I know it can be very, very tempting to just skip ahead and get to the spells, but Freuler does dedicate a huge chunk of the beginning part of this book to things like shadow work, guiding the reader to look inward. It's about the expansion of craft, and it encourages the reader to really question what their idea of morals and ethics are within witchcraft. It really sets the reader up to be prepared for that spell work later on. Asking these questions. Why are certain things taboo? What is the history behind these taboo or, darker practices? The book dismantles that misconception that light and dark equals good and evil when it doesn't. In so many beginners' books, they touch on this idea that both magic and nature are not good or evil. They're not good or bad. They are simply neutral. Rain can water the crops. It can refill our supply of fresh water, but tsunamis can wipe out entire villages. Rain can also bring about floods. And of course, magic works by the same concept. You can heal someone or you can curse someone. It all comes from the same place. It just depends on how you use it. And that's a concept that gets brought up in so many beginners' books, and then it sort of just gets forgotten somewhere along the way. I so rarely see it mentioned in more intermediate books. And sure, that could be because authors are assuming that the readers are already aware of this. But there are plenty of things that keep getting said repetitively. And at least in my experience with what I've read, that concept is not one of those things. And it's not just books, but also the further you go into the community. And don't get me wrong, if somebody decides that they are more comfortable with the love and light aspect of witchcraft, they prefer doing the healing and none of the cursing, obviously those being two extremes, that's absolutely valid. But just because one person sticks with the love and light doesn't make the whole rest of it disappear. It doesn't erase the fact that the source of the magic of the love and the light spells is also the source for the curses, the hexes, the jinxes, the bindings, the so-called darker magic. So it is very validating and refreshing to have a mainstream author come along and say, yo, hey, this darker arena, it does exist. It has always existed. And it isn't inherently negative or evil. But it's not just about what you're casting, right? It's also what you're using to cast, your ingredients, also what emotions you're working with. I know some people who just adamantly refuse to ever work with negative emotions. Now, I think there are some emotions you have to be careful with, like anger, for instance. You can cast something that you regret later on because you're just too angry. You need a moment to think it through. But anger is a very powerful emotion. So if you've already thought it through, thought about the consequences for yourself and anybody else involved, then use that anger. But in many circles, working with anger is a dark practice. Like, personally, I don't think we should be uncomfortable reading about a lot of these topics, even if we don't want to incorporate them into our personal craft. For instance, there is a section on sacrifice. Now, Freuler in the text even states that she does not perform human or animal sacrifice. Neither do I. I never would. I use ethically harvested animal parts in my craft, yes, but I would never kill an animal for the sake of my magic. It completely goes against my spirituality for me personally. However, I do think it is important to understand the history behind this. I also think it's important that if you ever want to find an alternative to a certain ritual step or ingredient, it's good to know and understand what the purpose of that ritual step or ingredient was. And one thing I want to quote directly out of the book here states, "The truth is, witches didn't perform sacrifice. Humans performed sacrifice. All over the world, people of all persuasions, races, religions, and so forth can find this act in their history in some way." Now, when you can talk about that history and the purpose behind it openly, again, you can talk about other things that can be used. Instead of sacrificing an animal to a deity, you can provide them a different type of offering, or you can fast or give something up that you enjoy. These are still sacrifices, but nobody is being hurt in the process of committing those sacrifices. And yet they still hold the same meaning, the same ritual action. Sometimes you have to dig into that darker part of history to understand how to do the same thing in a more ethical manner by today's standards. And then, of course, Freuler goes on to tell you about how you can do something like fast as a sacrifice. Personally, I think touching on these darker topics, these taboo topics, are very important. Okay, so that's my tangent. That was meant to be a quick introduction, but it turned into a tangent. So here's my pros and cons list. Pros. Freuler is very, very realistic. For the most part, when it comes to the topics that she chooses to cover, she doesn't pull any punches. She is very matter of fact about the topics that she covers without being disrespectful. She also explains why certain things are done or why certain ingredients are used. Like, any serious practitioner isn't going to play with blood magic or use animal parts just to be like dark and edgy. And I mean, if they are using those things for that reason, personally, call me a gatekeeper, but I wouldn't consider them serious practitioners. They just want to be dark and edgy. So why use these things? Why use animal parts? Why use blood in magic? Society has led many to believe that blood is only used in black magic, and I use even bigger air quotes on that term because it is a racist term, and that anything involving death is related to evil. Freuler breaks it down as to why these are misconceptions. Now, if you're coming from a practice of love and light, or at least love and light leaning, and you're a little bit worried that this book is gonna be a little too much for you, don't be worried. Obviously, the use of the word dark is subjective, but personally, I didn't think anything in this book was all that crazy. Most of it was stuff I had kind of already been doing, if I'm being perfectly honest. Taboo in a lot of today's witchcraft circles, but not over the top. This book has a lot of variety. Yes, there are spells, but there are also sections on how to harvest or make different ingredients, as well as tidbits of history, a section on dark deities, a section on shadow work. And it's all done in a very conversational and easy to digest writing style. Finally, there is a big variety of spells in this book, and despite the subject matter of this book, Freuler understands that not everybody is going to feel comfortable working with animal parts. And so because of that, in every single spell where an animal part is called for, Freuler offers a plant-based alternative that you can use. Hey witches, just interrupting really fast to say, if you're enjoying this video so far, please consider giving it a like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you're looking for more ways to support my channel, you can find the link to my Patreon down below in the description box. And on to the cons, which I only really have like one? Several of the spells in this book are ones that I've seen before, or I've seen something very similar. Now, there's nothing wrong with having that collection of spells all in one place, especially as personally, I only use spell books as reference to make my own spells most of the time. But I was kind of hoping to find something fresh and unique in these, and I was left wanting because, like I said, most of these are spells or versions of spells that I've come across before. And finally, I have two things that I wouldn't really say they're pros or cons, it's just sort of up to personal taste. First of which is that most of the spells and most of the ingredients in this book are very folk-based. If you're more of a ceremonial practitioner, the spells in this book may not be for you. But again, this is not just a spell book. And I do think you'll find the rest of this book highly informative. Then, as I mentioned earlier, there is a list of dark deities with just a little quick summary of who they are, what they're about. I do wish it was a little bit more comprehensive, but at the same time, Freuler does say that she only covers the ones that she's familiar with. So I can't really blame her for including a ton of deities that maybe she's never worked with or maybe she's never studied, especially when that topic alone could fill its own book. So that's it. That's my book review of Blood and Bones. I do highly encourage people to check it out, beginners and more experienced practitioners alike. To be fair, if things like working with blood in ritual or working with animal parts makes you a little squeamish, it may not all be for you, but it is definitely worth the read for the historical aspects and for the shadow work aspects, as well as the work with the Dark Moon. Once again, if you're interested in checking this book out, it is linked down below in the description box. And if you've already read this book or even just skimmed it, maybe tried a few of the spells in it, I would love to hear about your experiences and your opinions on it, whether you agree with me or not. Go ahead and leave those down in the comments below. If you're brand new, welcome! Please subscribe. I would love to keep you around in a non-creepy way. Anyway, that's all for now, witches. I will see you all next week with a brand new video. In the meantime, stay magical.